In part 2 of our recap of the story of Horizon Zero Dawn, we spoke about several important things, such as the Faro Plague and Operation Enduring Victory. In this third and final part, we will finally talk about Project Zero Dawn, recount the events of the rest of the game and answer all of your lingering questions. But before we move ahead, please be aware, spoilers ahead. Having destroyed the focus network of the Eclipse, Aloy eventually makes her way to and sneaks through Sunfall, the capital city of the Shadow Carja, and surprisingly enough she's able to get inside the Zero Dawn launch base without attracting any attention. And here, she finally learns the truth of Zero Dawn, and exactly what it is. At the Grave Horde, Aloy had learned about Operation Enduring Victory, and how despite their devastating and catastrophic losses, the people of the world still very much bought into the operation. This was because they knew that even in spite of all their losses, no matter how cataclysmic they may seem, they were still successfully buying time for Elisabet Sobeck and her team to finish working on Zero Dawn, the super weapon that would destroy the Faro swarm and put an end to the war. However, Project Zero Dawn was no super weapon. The entire public at large had been lied to in order to give them hope and to give them a reason to keep fighting. As part of Operation Enduring Victory itself, so what exactly was Zero Dawn? We've already discussed how the machines, at the rate that they were consuming biomass and self-replicating, would strip the Earth clean in the span of just 15 months. Using nukes obviously would not have been an option. The machines were self-replicating, which meant that there were too many of them. And using that many nukes to stop them would effectively be as bad as letting them consume the entire planet's biomass. The only other way to put an end to the Faro Plague would have been to break through the glitch that had caused it in the first place. But as it turns out, even with all the AIs and technological prowess at their disposal, it would take at least 50 years to go through the millions of variables of code and lines of programming and finally find the code that would correct the glitch. That is where Project Zero Dawn came in. Zero Dawn was never supposed to stop the Faro Plague, at least not the way everyone thought it would. As it turns out, all life on Earth was completely wiped out 1,000 years ago. The Faro swarm consumed the planet's entire ecosystem, destroying all humans, all flora and fauna, all life. The function of Zero Dawn was to initially keep working on finding a way to break through the glitch, even after all life had perished. And once the Faro machines had been finally disabled, to reconstruct the Earth's ecosystem and eventually reintroduce human, plant and animal life onto the planet with the help of preserved DNA, samples and seeds, ultimately ensuring that even after the cataclysmic events that had been brought about by the Faro Plague, life would still go on. All of Zero Dawn was essentially a massive global system of underground bunkers and facilities capable of cloning and automated manufacturing, and at the center of this entire network was a hyper-powerful AI known as Gaia. While Gaia's own main purpose was to break the code that had caused the glitch in the Faro swarm, she had 9 subcomponents, 9 more AIs that each had their own unique functions as well. For instance, there was Apollo, which was supposed to archive everything to do with human culture and the history of the world for the education of future human generations, whenever they will be able to be born, or made rather. This way they would be able to learn all of their ancestors' technologies and advancement, and also to learn from their mistakes. Where did this archive go then? What happened to Apollo, and why is so little now known of the old ones? We'll get to that in a while. Then there were AIs like Poseidon and Ether, responsible for the cleansing of the Earth's seas and oceans, and the detoxification of the atmosphere respectively. There was Demeter, which was responsible for the replanting of the Earth from cryogenically preserved seed stocks. There was Eleuthia, which was dedicated to the cloning and raising of humans from genetic and DNA samples once the planet was habitable again. This was to be done in underground facilities that were scattered throughout the planet. There was Minerva. Once Gaia was done with figuring out what the code to break the Faro swarm's glitch was, Minerva would shut down all the killer robots by broadcasting it globally through several massive communication arrays, which it was also responsible for the construction of. Another AI subfunction of Gaia's was called Artemis, which was supposed to reintroduce animal life into the Earth's ecosystem. However, Artemis was only programmed to do so for what were called pioneer organisms, the fundamental organisms if you will, The basic building blocks, everything from microorganisms to the likes of fish, insects, foxes, rabbits, boars, turkeys and the like. More and more animal species were supposed to be reintroduced by later generations of humans, who would do so based on the knowledge passed down to them by Apollo. Obviously that didn't pan out, and again we'll get to why that happened in a bit. One of the most important sub-functions of Gaia was Hephaestus, and its responsibility was a heavy one. It was supposed to oversee and facilitate the terraforming of the Earth once the Faro swarm had been shut down, and it was supposed to do so with the help of a number of its own line of new machines, all of which it was supposed to design, manufacture and deploy itself. These machines would then be used by other AIs for whatever purpose they saw fit in order to facilitate their own functions. So why couldn't the scientists working on Zero Dawn just build machines themselves which could later be used by Gaia? Well, because they didn't want to leave behind a bunch of outmoded and outdated machinery that Gaia may or may not be able to properly make use of. Their purpose was to empower Hephaestus, and in turn Gaia, to design and build any and all machines it might need for any conceivable purpose. The question though is if Gaia's main purpose above all else was to ensure the preservation of life on Earth, why are machines developed by Hephaestus suddenly attacking humans? In other words, what exactly caused the derangement? Moving away from the questions for a while, let's talk about the implications of all this. The most important of these implications perhaps is this, that other than a few machines such as the Corruptors and the Deathbringers, all the others were not manufactured by Faro Automated Solutions, but by Gaia herself. This also explains why all the Faro machines are usually found buried beneath the ground, as opposed to the machines made by Hephaestus, since the Earth's terraforming took place after the Faro swarm had been shut down. Something else you should note. These Faro robots were among the very machines, new and unknown to the people that now inhabit the world, that started resurfacing close to 20 years ago, when the derangement of the machines first began. Why? You'll find out soon enough. And then there's Hades. Yes, as you might have figured out by now, this Hades is an AI. In fact, it's one of the AIs that was designed as a sub-function of Gaia herself. So what's the purpose of Hades? Well, Hades was basically an extinction failsafe protocol, a hard reset button if the need for one ever arose. Basically, if there were any errors, any flaws, any unforeseen and unwanted elements in the terraforming process, anything that would make the conditions unfavorable for life, Hades would take over, destroy the biosphere once again, and allow Gaia to start over. But clearly that is not what's happening right now. There was clearly no fault in the biosphere, since life was indeed successfully developed. So why is Hades trying to bring about another extinction event now? And why is it helping the Shadow Carja in their efforts to take back Meridian? Why does it want to kill Aloy? Something has caused Hades to go off script, and Aloy still doesn't know what that is. So yeah, everyone related to Project Zero Dawn, including Elisabet Sobeck and Ted Faro, knew that the human race and all other life forms on the planet were doomed to extinction, and there was nothing anyone could do to change that. There just wasn't enough time. And so they resigned themselves to be completely wiped out by the Faro swarm, but not without ensuring that life would still have a future on Earth, no matter how far away that might be. What an ambitious reveal, right? Talk about escalation. Even despite having made all these discoveries though, there is much Aloy still doesn't know. Who or what developed Aloy? Is Elisabet Sobeck still alive, as Silence had suggested she might be? What caused the derangement of the machines? Why, if Zero Dawn was a success, is the world in its current primal tribal state? To get all the answers to these questions, Aloy determines that she has to go to the sacred mountain in the Nora Valley, behind the door that the Nora adhere to, the very place Aloy came from. Remember how Aloy couldn't get past that door before due to a glitch in its system? Well, now she can. At the orbital launch base in Sunfall, Aloy downloads a registry into her focus from the office of Elisabet Sobeck herself, which means that she finally has access to get past the door. Before Aloy can leave the launch base though, she is ambushed and captured by Eclipse forces. She wakes up to find herself in a cage, face to face with Helis, the leader of the Eclipse, and the man who had almost killed her at the Proving. Aloy listens to some of his fanatical babble about how she was meant to survive all of his attacks, so that she could now be captured and offered as sacrifice to Hades and the Sun. Aloy tries to speak some sense into him, telling him that it's a machine that cares nothing about the war of the Carja and the Shadow Carja, and wants nothing more than the complete extinction and annihilation of all life on Earth. Predictably, Helis doesn't listen to her. He tells her that after Aloy crashed the Focus Network, Helis gathered his Eclipse forces, rallying all his soldiers, and mounted an invasion of the Nora's sacred land. He ordered every single Nora killed, with hopes that he would find and catch Aloy there. Having found her in Sunfall itself though, Helis accepts that the attack on the sacred land, which is currently underway, was ultimately unneeded. Regardless, he mockingly tells her that even if he wanted to, he couldn't just recall the attack, since long-distance communication is now impossible thanks to Aloy's destruction of the Focus Network. With this, Helis drops Aloy into an arena of sorts, and releases a massive machine known as a behemoth upon her. After a long, grueling fight, Aloy manages to survive by the skin of her teeth, and is able to defeat the behemoth. Helis is, as you might have guessed, not happy. He releases 2 more corrupted machines, this time Corruptors, into the arena, and orders them to kill Aloy. And just as it seems that she might finally be overwhelmed, Silence rides to her rescue. The gates of the arena blast apart, and Silence rides in with several controlled machines. He grabs Aloy, and before they can be attacked, the 2 of them ride away as fast as they possibly can, while several of Silence's own machines stay back to hold off the Corruptors. With no time to waste, what with the Nora under attack by a veritable force of Eclipse soldiers and corrupted machines, Aloy rushes to the Sacred Land. When she gets there, she sees that the attack is worse than she could have imagined. There's machines and Eclipse soldiers everywhere. Entire settlements and villages have been burned to the ground, and there's been a lot of casualties, with very few Nora Braves still left alive. With Aloy's help though, the Nora are successfully able to defeat the Eclipse and their machines, ensuring that even though they might have broken through into Nora territory, they would never make it out. Having held off this devastating attack, Aloy enters the Sacred Mountain, but before she proceeds further, she speaks with Matriarch Teersa, hoping to get the answers to some burning questions about Rost, more specifically, about why he was made an outcast. Teersa reveals that many years ago, even before Aloy was born, before Rost was an outcast, he had a family, a wife and a daughter. One day, however, a band of 12 murderous outlanders struck the village where they used to live, killed his wife and took several villagers, among Rost's own daughter, hostage. Eventually, all of these hostages were killed by the murderers, including Rost's daughter, and the bandits left their corpses right outside the boundaries of the Nora's sacred land as a mockery of sorts, because they knew the Nora would not break their laws and cross their boundaries, even to the bodies, or to give chase to the bandits themselves. Rost was racked by grief, but he could still not bring himself to break the sacred laws of his tribe, and so he asked the matriarchs to make him a Death Seeker, essentially a seeker who has a license to kill, but ceases to be part of the tribe and is never allowed to return to Noraland. Wounded and on the precipice of death, he returned to the sacred land. By law, the matriarchs were supposed to drive him out, since in becoming a Death Seeker, he had given up being a part of the tribe. The matriarchs, however, could not bring themselves to do so, and so they made an exception. They allowed Rost to live among the Nora, but as an outcast. Eventually, Aloy enters the heart of the Sacred Mountain, where she is finally able to get past the door, and here all her lingering questions are answered. Aloy learns that this facility behind this door is the main Eleuthia Cradle facility, where new human beings were developed by the Eleuthia AI. More importantly though, Aloy discovers what exactly happened that caused Gaia to lose control of her subsystems. While Gaia had been functioning exactly as she ought to, with no errors in her system and no faults in any of her subfunctions, everything changed 20 years ago. Why, you ask? About 2 decades ago, Gaia received a mysterious transmission, one originating from an unknown source. The transmission caused all her subordinate AIs to break free from her control, becoming self-aware and erratic. Due to this error in her system, Hades attempted to seize control of the terraforming system and reverse it to bring about another extinction and complete obliteration of the Earth's ecosystem, something it was originally designed to do, but was now attempting to needlessly carry out due to the transmission of unknown origin. Unwilling to let Hades bring about another extinction event, Gaia commanded the reactor in the facility that housed her AI core, known as Gaia Prime, to self-destruct. She calculated that this would destroy her, and in turn Hades as well. While this would successfully stop Hades from bringing about an extinction event, this would also mean that in Gaia's absence, her subfunctions would eventually malfunction and begin operating in a chaotic way that could ultimately be about as dangerous and harmful to all life on Earth. She is, of course, referring to the derangement, but we'll get to that in just a bit. To make sure that that didn't happen, Gaia activated another failsafe. She ordered the Eleuthia Cradle facility to develop a genetic clone of Elisabet Sobeck, which is how Aloy was born. Having the same DNA makeup as Elisabet, this clone would be able to enter the Eleuthia facility inside the Sacred Mountain and view a message left behind by Gaia explaining everything. Ultimately, with access to all Zero Dawn facilities, this clone Aloy would be able to rebuild the system core and hence rebuild Gaia. This also explains why Hades has wanted Aloy dead all along. However, even though Gaia triggered an explosion in the Gaia Prime facility, thus destroying her own core, she was somehow unable to destroy Hades. How? Hades reacted in a most unusual way, presumably due to the same mysterious transmission that set it free in the first place, and launched a virus that destroyed the lines of code that kept it shackled to Gaia Prime. Hades escaped to an unknown location, and though it was significantly weaker without the core functions and links to Gaia, it still managed to survive. Hades' virus, however, corrupted a whole lot of data in Gaia's systems, including the Alpha Registry and DNA security system at Cradle facilities, which is what had caused the door inside the Sacred Mountain to remain locked for so long. Aloy finds out that there is a master override located at Gaia Prime, and it is effectively the only thing that can possibly stop Hades anymore, what with Gaia having been destroyed. Let's take a step back for a moment and talk about the derangement in some detail. 20 years ago, when Gaia destroyed her own core, all her subfunctions became self-aware. This included Hephaestus, the AI that was responsible for the creation of machines for any and all purposes that Gaia could possibly conceive. When Gaia was destroyed, though, there was no longer anything left to govern the systems and functions of Hephaestus. Though humans and Gaia's machines had always survived in peaceful coexistence, humans sometimes used to hunt machines for parts and scrap, as they do even now. Hephaestus took this as signs of aggression, and thus began programming machines to become more aggressive themselves, so that they could defend themselves. What's more, it also began designing and creating machines specifically for combat situations, including the likes of Sawtooths and Thunderjaw. This is exactly why all these larger, more dangerous types of machines first came into existence 2 decades ago. This phenomenon, along with the increased aggression of the machines, came to be known as the derangement. With all this information, Aloy finally heads for Gaia Prime in search for the Master Override, and it's at Gaia Prime that the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place. The first question that's answered is, what happened to Elisabet Sobeck? 1,000 years ago, after the destruction of the world at the hands of the Faro swarm was complete, and the remaining scientists of Project Zero Dawn were living out the rest of their days within Gaia Prime, Gaia informed them that due to a system malfunction, one of the doors of the facility had failed to shut completely. As such, signals were escaping the facility, and the Faro swarm, having become aware of their presence, was barreling down on their location. Elisabet Sobeck sacrificed herself, wearing an environmental suit and going outside of the facility, manually closing the door herself. The other burning question that has remained unanswered until now is, what happened to Apollo, the massive archive of past human knowledge that was supposed to educate the future generations of humans? Well, remember Ted Faro? Yeah, that douchebag. He deleted the entire archive, wiping out thousands of years' worth of knowledge and consigning future human generations to complete ignorance, absolute lack of technology and scientific knowledge, and thus tribal lifestyles. Supposedly, he did this because he wanted to make sure that future generations didn't repeat the same mistakes that their ancestors and Ted Faro himself had made. Oh, and what do you know? This also meant that human beings in the future would also never know that everything that happened was basically his fault. How convenient, right? This is also why the AI Artemis had been unable to reintroduce anything beyond pioneer organisms into the Earth's ecosystem, because all knowledge of all other species of flora and fauna had been lost with the destruction of Apollo. Eventually, Aloy finds and retrieves the Master Override, and as she's about to exit Gaia Prime, she runs into Silence, and he has some confessions to make. He tells Aloy that years ago, it was him who first found and recovered Hades, or what had remained of it after Gaia's explosion. Curious for knowledge as he always has been, Silence repaired Hades, and the AI made a deal with the man. Silence would give as much information and knowledge as he had of the new world to Hades in exchange for that of the old one, which explains why Silence has always known so much about so much. It is also revealed that it was Silence himself who had first developed the Eclipse. Why? Well, the Eclipse were essentially pawns that Hades planned to use to get to its ultimate goal. Eventually, Hades decided that Silence had outlived his usefulness in order to have him killed. Ever since then, Silence has been living on as a fugitive. But what exactly is Hades' ultimate goal? Remember Minerva, one of Gaia's sub-functions? Its function was to develop a massive communication array that would broadcast the code that would shut down the Faro swarm. One such communication array is the Spire, the massive monolithic tower in Meridian we spoke of earlier. Hades wants to use the Spire to broadcast a signal to reawaken the Faro robots, bring them back above ground and start yet another extinction event by making them consume the planet's biomass and ecosystem once again. The Shadow Carja and the Eclipse, who believe that Hades has been helping them in their war against the Carja and will ultimately help them take back Meridian, have been nothing but unwitting but all too willing pawns all along. Hades obviously couldn't care less about whether or not the Shadow Carja take back Meridian, it only wants to use them to get to the Spire. Silence tells Aloy that he wants to make amends for the major involvement he had in everything that has happened, while Aloy, along with us, the players, can be sure that that is hardly the complete truth. It is still Silence, after all. Now is hardly the time to mistrust the only help she's about to receive. Silence hands her his own lance, and tells her that she can attach the Master Override to it and then plunge it into Hades' core to destroy the AI once and for all. Silence departs on this note, and Aloy begins preparations for her final mission. Her last stand against all of Hades' collective might, including countless Eclipse soldiers and an entire army of all sorts of corrupted machines. Aloy gathers all the allies she has accrued throughout her journey, and with them she comes to Meridian. Her goal is to make sure that, no matter what, Hades' forces do not make it to the Spire. That, of course, is easier said than done. When Helis arrives with Hades in tow, he arrives in full strength, with frightening aggression and focused ferocity. The attack on Meridian is brutal and terrifying, and the final section of Horizon Zero Dawn sees the forces of Meridian, Aloy and all her allies desperately trying to push back the armies that are now crashing into them relentlessly. As such, the Eclipse soldiers manage to break through Meridian's defenses and are able to reach the Spire. They place Hades' core at the foot of the Spire, and the AI immediately begins broadcasting its signal across the globe, reawakening the Faro swarm. Deathbringers and Corruptors begin rising up from beneath the ground across the world, and immediately they start consuming biomass, everything from humans and animals to trees and insects. The extinction event from 1,000 years ago, the event that destroyed all life on Earth, has started yet again. After fighting her way through the Eclipse's forces, Aloy is able to finally confront and kill Helis, and then eventually manages to reach the Spire. With the help of Meridian's soldiers, she fights against the Eclipse's forces, as well as some corrupted machines, including a terrifying Deathbringer. Ultimately, however, Aloy is able to defeat them all. She runs to Hades' core and jams Silence lance into it, finally destroying Hades. The signal stops broadcasting, the Faro swarm is put back to sleep, and the extinction event is brought to a halt before it can do any more damage. The people of Meridian look on and celebrate this fantastic victory. In the final moments of the game, Aloy travels to the house of Elisabet Sobeck, where she finds her corpse encased in an environmental suit. After she successfully resealed the Gaia Prime facility, Elisabet was presumably able to survive the attacks of the oncoming Faro swarm thanks to her environmental suit, and was ultimately able to make it back to her childhood home in what had once been Carson City, Nevada. At some point, it can be assumed that her environmental suit stopped functioning, and once it was no longer able to protect her from the toxic atmosphere, she eventually died. Aloy scans her corpse with her focus and discovers an audio recording of Elisabet conversing with Gaia. The AI asks Elisabet what she would have wanted her child to be like if she ever had one. And in one of the most moving moments of the game, Elisabet said that she would want to have her to be curious, willful and unstoppable, but also compassionate enough to, in her own way, heal the world just a little bit. A perfect description of Aloy, as it turns out. Aloy closes her eyes and has a moment of mourning for the mother that she's been looking for her entire life. The woman who sacrificed herself and gave everything she had to, essentially, save the world. That's not it though, and it turns out Horizon Zero Dawn has one more curveball to throw at us before it draws the curtains. Hades, it is revealed in the game's final scene, hasn't actually been destroyed, not completely. A straggling flare of corruption fires off from the remnants of Hades' core and flies away in a seemingly random direction. It travels a long distance before it's ultimately captured in a container of sorts by, no prizes for guessing, Silence. Silence tells Hades that there's much they still have to discuss, so much knowledge that Silence is hungry for that Hades still hasn't revealed to him, such as Hades' masters, as Silence says, the ones who sent the transmission 20 years ago, the very same transmission that freed Hades of Gaia, and also led to the derangement, and that is where Horizon Zero Dawn ends. And there it is, the complete story of Horizon from start to finish. There is, however, so much we still didn't speak about, so much that was featured quite prominently in the game, but was ultimately not that essential to the larger story. Important characters like Val and War Chief Sona, memorable, well-written secondary quests that did an excellent job in developing not just the game's lore and background conflicts, but also some of the game's most important supporting characters, such as Erend and Sun King of Art. There's also quite a bit of lore and background information that we still haven't touched on. And really, that's the beauty of Horizon Zero Dawn. After 3 parts, we still haven't talked about everything the game has to offer narratively. As such, if there's anything you think was important to the game's story but we didn't talk about, please tell us about it in the comments section below. We hope you enjoyed this series. And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily, so make sure you don't miss them by subscribing. We appreciate your support, and we thank you for checking us out.